Almost every single video game company has stumbled upon a horrific disaster. And for Nintendo, that disaster was the Wii U. After riding the high of the original Wii that sold over 100 million units, they decided to launch a sequel that was so confusing, so poorly understood that it actually just looked and felt like a gut punch to the Nintendo brand. As somebody who bought a Wii U and loved the Wii U, it unfortunately just failed so hard. It sold less in its entire lifespan than the PS4 sold in a single year, and Nintendo, by the end of this, was kind of humiliated. And they took that personally. They regrouped and they learned from their mistakes. They would go on to reinvent another console and create something that was just as revolutionary, if not more, than the original Wii, and it sold and surpassed the Wii and put Nintendo back on the top of the mountain. And now here we are 7 to 8 years later in a very nostalgic position where Nintendo is back on the throne, back sitting high up on the mountain, and they're dropping and releasing a sequel to their recently revolutionary console. Except this time, the sequel makes sense and it's selling insane. Even my wife, who does not typically enjoy Nintendo products, has surprisingly been having fun with the Switch 2. It is so much whiplash that it feels almost like Nintendo is apologizing for the Wii U as they've shown us how much they've learned from that mistake. So how did Nintendo pull off such a dramatic turnaround, and why is the Switch 2 skyrocketing? Meanwhile, the Wii U somehow failed when they're both sequels to a crazy original console. This thing has been out for about 2 weeks, so I've had plenty of time to digest what's so great about it, what I also don't like about it, and what's different with this launch compared to the Wii U. The Wii U flopped for so many different reasons. It was kind of this perfect storm of absolute chaos and disaster for Nintendo. And it's hard to admit that because I really loved the Wii U, and I bought my first Wii U in like 2013 whenever the Wind Waker HD game came out. And I bought the Wii U specifically so I could play Wind Waker HD, but I ended up loving a lot of other exclusives on the console, especially Nintendo Land. That is like just one of, if not the best party games that's ever been created. I feel like nobody talks about Nintendo Land, but it's so good. Okay, I don't even know what's happening.
Why is my face on the screen?
What do you mean?
Why is my face on the screen?
But despite how good some of the games were, overall, there were a lot of issues here. The name and marketing for this console were such a disaster. People didn't know if it was actually a separate sequel or if it was just an add-on to the Wii, because they never showed the actual console in the videos. All we saw was the gamepad. Consumers didn't really see a big value in upgrading because it just felt not like a sequel to the Wii, and they didn't know because the name also didn't suggest that. In addition to all of this, the launch titles were also pretty abysmal. We're getting Nintendo Land, which I love, but that's like a brand new unheard of game that nobody really knows about unless you've played it. And then you've got new Super Mario Bros. U, which is just a big fat turd on my doorstep because we've already seen like 3 other games just like this. I didn't even buy new Super Mario Bros. U. And to make things worse, the third-party support from video games was so bad. A lot of companies didn't even want to develop or make games for the Wii U. It was just a perfect storm, an avalanche of disaster that Nintendo were getting drowned in. And I think the Nintendo Wii was such a casual gamer console that it was also just a really hard sell to anybody who owned an original Wii. Like, I think a lot of people enjoyed their Wii. They liked playing against Matt in Wii Sports and baseball, and that was it. So there was no reason or incentive to pick up a brand new sequel when you kind of just did the same things in that newer console. And it also now comes with a massive gamepad that you don't know why it exists. And Nintendo are now trying to essentially just eradicate that from their history by doing the total opposite with the Switch 2. First of all, the name is different. It's the Switch 2. There's no like Super Switch, there's no new Switch, there's no Switch U. It is literally and simply put the Switch 2. The third-party support is already there for the Switch 2. There's plenty of games that are coming in the future and that have been confirmed to launch for the Switch 2 that will provide so much value from different developers and different companies, and yeah, it's definitely different. The Switch 2 launch titles, while are open for criticism, I don't think they're the best launch titles we've ever gotten. It's kind of hard to compete with Breath of the Wild. I still think that Nintendo saw the success of Mario Kart and decided, hey, how could we not put Mario Kart as a launch title for the successor of the Switch? The ads also don't focus so much on the gimmick of the Switch 2. There is a mouse mode, but we've rarely ever seen that, and it's not like the focal point of every single advertisement we're getting out of the Switch 2, where they're only using the mouse to play games, which is what would have happened if they wanted to repeat the Wii U situation. And I also think the demand for the Switch 2 is a lot stronger than whatever the demand was for the Wii U. I think most people with the original Wii were happy to just continue to play their little bowling games in peace with their grandma. Meanwhile, a lot of owners of the original Switch were just begging Nintendo for them to upgrade their crappy Android tablet from like 2008. So Nintendo have absolutely flipped the Switch here and gotten things right with the marketing, the branding of the Switch 2, and just the vision overall for what this console and what this sequel needs to be. But in order to make this a decent and a good sequel, they actually have to match that vision with good hardware. It's much bigger than the original Switch, but the size has grown a lot on me. Initially, I thought it was going to be a little bit too big and kind of felt like a handheld, like the other Megalodon handhelds we've gotten, like the Steam Deck, but I actually think that Nintendo hit the absolute limit of how big they could have made this without it getting in the way. For example, I think the Steam Deck is actually just slightly too big because of the way that the controls and the thickness of it and just how everything feels. It definitely feels like you're holding a massive handheld. Meanwhile, with the Switch 2, because it's thinner and it doesn't have the same ergonomics, while it's less comfortable, it just doesn't feel as chunky. The buttons are snappier here, the triggers are easier to use because they're bigger in size, and I've also really enjoyed the HD rumble. I feel like it's been pretty immersive and something that not a lot of people have been giving credit to the design of it. It feels great. The rumble is nice whenever you're playing in handheld. The 1080p 120Hz LCD screen is really solid. I like the contrast and the saturation of the colors here. I think it makes games pop, and they do look great on this thing whenever you're indoors and especially in lower light conditions. And overall, I think that they packaged this hardware really nicely, made some good decisions in almost every single category. And of course, it does feel like a direct upgrade from that original Switch, which I guess at this point isn't too hard to beat. There have been complaints though about multiple different things, and one of the biggest ones that I'm seeing online and that I've also experienced myself is the battery size on this. If you're playing high demanding games, this thing basically maxes out at about like 2 to 2.5 hours of battery life, which is pretty much on the lower end, in my opinion, of what I expected for the Switch 2. For me personally, that's fine. I don't play 8 hours of video games anymore like I used to when I was an esports player, so I kind of have died down with a lot of the amount of gaming that I do, so it's not a big deal for me, but for somebody who wants to pump some sessions into the Switch 2, that could be a deal breaker. And as much as I think that these Joy-Cons are a massive improvement, I am having slight issues with them. I'm running into this issue only on my left joystick, where essentially whenever I push it all the way up and then rock it left to right, I hear this weird, annoying clicking noise, and it also feels like there's this slight little piece of like a plastic or a bump or something that I have to move over whenever I rock from left to right. It's so weird. It's hardly noticeable, but it's still there. They are better, they are bigger. This might just be my unit specifically, but I can't tell you how annoyed I was to find out that yes, there's still some problems on the Joy-Cons. The performance here is pretty darn good. This isn't the most powerful handheld on the market, but the fact that it's something that can compete with other handhelds out there right now, and it's something that you have to at least compare it to, and it's a Nintendo console at that, I think is pretty great for what you're buying. It's about as powerful, if not slightly more powerful, than a Steam Deck in handheld mode, and then we get that increased performance over the Steam Deck whenever it's docked. As far as 120 frames or the 120 Hz screen, there's actually like no titles out right now that do utilize the 120 frames. There's a minigame in the Welcome Tour that does actually hit 120 frames, and there's also a Metroid game coming in the future that's advertised to hit and have a 120 FPS mode. But for how much Nintendo was actually pushing this in the marketing, I'm a bit shocked here that there's not nearly as many options, if any at all, that actually use the hardware in this refresh rate. Backwards compatibility is one of, if not my favorite things that I have discussed in several other videos already about the Switch 2. I think it's just such a great thing that we get access to so many original Switch titles that we can now play again on our Switch 2. And in a lot of instances, the performance is upgraded. We're getting faster loading times. Some games are getting free updates where it's better frame rate, smoother graphics, and overall, it's like you're getting a free remaster in a lot of instances. Now, it does have some loopholes. It doesn't play every single original Switch game, and it also doesn't upgrade every single original Switch game either. So some of them you're just going to get faster loading times, a little bit of smoother frame rates where it's not dropping all the way to like 10 or 15. And also some of the bigger upgrades like the Zelda Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom are put behind a paywall, which does kind of frustrate me a little bit. But it is a nice feeling when something gets upgraded for free, like Splatoon 3 now got a free update, and oh my god, it's so weird playing the Splatoon 3 game and running around in the main lobby and not getting like the worst frame rate. I remember on the original Switch, that lobby, you get like 10 frames. It's just so bad. But then on the Switch 2, it's buttery smooth. I am very happy with the performance. I think that we're probably going to get like a newer handheld that's going to get released in the next year or two that's going to come in at around the same price. And I think it's probably going to blow the Steam Deck 2, or wait, it'll probably blow the Switch 2 out of the water, but for now, I think the performance is still pretty great. And this should give us plenty of years, plenty of time to play games and not feel like it's the most outdated hardware like we did with the original console. One of the biggest critiques for the Switch 2 that we're getting across all platforms is the fact that this lacks innovation and that it feels more like a Switch Pro than it does a brand new console. And it's weird because I really understand that argument, but then at the same time, it's like it's the Switch 2. I don't know what we were really expecting. I guess some people wanted Nintendo to drop some crazy gem or something completely left field. Maybe the mouse mode wasn't enough to get some people to think that this was like a new console. The leap in hardware and the sheer power to me is big enough to justify this being a new console. And I think that most importantly, what really trips people up into thinking that this is just a pro version is just the stupid UI. The UI is almost identical to the original Switch. There's no new menu music. There's no like visual flair. There's no themes. And you know, we're visual creatures. We see something and we want it to be brand new. If this had new UI, I think we would see way less comments about how it's a Switch Pro and it's just, you know, a slightly beefier Switch, because it would look so much different. At least just give me maybe an option to change the background instead of choosing from black and white. I can't even put my folders for my games on the front menu. I have to scroll all the way over to the right and then access the menu and then go to the groups. It's like, what are we doing? How can we go from the Wii UI, which is beautiful, even the Wii U I thought was great, even though that was apparently a huge failure, and now we've just got squares. I get that it works. I get that it functions. It's just, I do not like it. The eShop, though, is finally fast, so it doesn't feel like a punishment whenever you're forced to scroll through that thing. The Nintendo Switch Online retro catalog is also pretty okay. I think that the emulation on this is fine. It does the job, and I think it's cool playing, you know, retro Nintendo games on their newest console. My biggest gripe, though, with NSO is like this background. Why can't I just make it solid black? Instead, I'm forced to use this weird gradient one, which just looks so ugly. And, you know, why are you making the bezels look that much bigger? I don't get it. And this kind of segues a little bit into the digital game ownership, where I'm not even sure what ownership even is anymore, because now there's a bunch of physical cartridges that don't actually have the game on them. Instead, it's a physical key cartridge, which is so weird and so dystopian. I'm going to try buying all of my cartridges physically for the Switch 2, but that might prove to be difficult in case there's only key cartridges. So do I even own my games anymore? Probably not. You know what? let's just rent everything. So yes, the Switch 2, if we really compare this thing apples to apples with the Wii U, this is just a night and day difference. The branding, the vision is all there. And on top of that now, the hardware and what it's delivering, in my opinion, does hit the standard that we can call it a good and a solid sequel. If anything, just a great upgrade from your original Switch. But should you buy it? That is a very difficult question, and one that's also getting more and more complicated as time goes on in the handheld gaming market. If you are a big, massive Nintendo fan and you love the Switch and you still play it, and there's plenty of games on there that you already own, I think that the Switch 2, even in its current state, would be awesome for you. I think any type of Switch fan, any type of Nintendo fan that is their dedicated console, jumping to this would feel truly like a massive upgrade, even with the lack of launch titles and the lack of certain features that we're waiting on. However, if you're somebody who likes Nintendo games and wants to play the Nintendo games, but you aren't the biggest diehard fan, maybe you lean a little bit more towards PC gaming, maybe you've already got a Steam Deck, I absolutely think that you should hold off at least for a little while and let this thing catch up with some momentum with the game catalog and overall just features. I think that Nintendo are going to fix up a couple of different bugs. They've been working on the battery thing. They're probably going to throw even more free upgrades to a lot of original Switch titles. I think that in about a year, the Switch 2, at that point, will probably be pretty undeniable. If you're not ready to commit to $70 to $80 games that drop every once in a while, then I think the Steam Deck or a PC handheld would be much more up your alley, because while those might run you a little bit more money, you're gonna have access to things like the Steam sales, which will significantly decrease a lot of the prices for the games and overall just software. In my personal opinion, I am happy that I dove into the Switch 2 now, but I was only able to afford this because I have this YouTube channel. All of the ad revenue that I get from this channel just goes into me trying to buy more products and potentially make more videos for you guys. And if I didn't have this and wasn't so blessed to have the opportunity to try this thing out and be an early adopter because of this YouTube channel, I wouldn't have been able to pick this thing up, and I would have had to wait, because that would have been the smarter move for me personally. But yeah, that's about it for the Switch 2. Only time will tell if this thing can manage to outsell the Wii U. I think we're already like a fourth of the way there, and it's been like 2 weeks compared to the lifespan of the Wii U, but it hasn't happened yet. So technically the Wii U is still a better console here.
Don't say too much, don't say too much. You trying to make plans with a plastic touch. I'ma hit you right back with a peace sign. I'm a sucker for the short, not a long time. Never drop plan A for the beat line. Even if